Okay, on the right here, we have the framework. So over the next few slides, I'll be referring to the WebWorks SDK has two parts, essentially, framework and extensions, right? So framework is what is responsible for all of the security features, all whitelisting. It is responsible for loading native extensions. It is responsible for routing. It's responsible for, it does, in BB10, it also does a bunch of UI elements like context menus, dialogues. So it does a fair bit of work. But the real reason it exists is that it needs to catch the request that comes from the WebWorks JS and route it to each one of the extensions, right? So, well, what we're here for today is building an extension. So the extension consists of a client.js file, an index.js file, a JNEXT.js file, JNEXT extension.so, which is nothing but a compiled library, compiled JNEXT library. And I'll talk about in much more detail what JNEXT is. And it contains manifest.json, which is probably the simplest piece of the puzzle. This might seem like a whole lot of things you have to do for one extension, but it's actually fairly small pieces that talk to each other and make your life significantly easier than one big file, probably. Well, that's the hope. So moving on, I'll be jumping back to the slide every now and then just to give it more, so hopefully people understand it better. So for JNEXT, so anybody in this room has actually heard of JNEXT? Nothing. Okay. So basically, JNEXT is an open source, cross-platform, cross-browser framework for extending web browser JavaScript. So this is not something that works only. You can write a JNEXT extension for Chrome. You could write a JNEXT extension for Firefox, like Mozilla, or really whatever the hell you want. So you can visit jnext.org, and we'll tell you a lot of interesting information about writing a JNEXT extension. Obviously, we have our own implementation, and we ported over JNEXT to a BB10 device so that you can load JNEXT extensions. And that is where you write your native code. So again, like you'll see a trend across a lot of the BB10 sessions that you're seeing, at least the web ones. A lot of it is open source. So it's all about open source standards. So this, I would like to believe, kind of fits in, even though JNEXT is clearly not popular amongst this group. Okay, so you guys heard of the awesome HTML JavaScript browser, right? You heard, some of you guys were hopefully in the web super session, heard about the multiple web views and like all this pseudo magic that is not heard of a whole lot. But basically how this works is WebWorks has 3 web views. 2 are of interest to you. The third one is more an overlay web view that we use for displaying UI components because we don't want to inject into your DOM, right? So you have the client web view. So client web view is where your app runs, right? You have the client web view, you have the client.js file, right? So if you go back to the previous slide, you wrote so every extension has a client.js file, right? All those client.js files run in the client web view, right? So a client web view is nothing but an instance of what you might think of as the browser, right? So it is an instance where you can run HTML, JavaScript code. On the right is the controller web view. This is, think of it as a stronger, more powerful, uncontrollable power type of web view. It is got God permissions and everything. It can basically do whatever the hell it wants. It doesn't have any web security. It doesn't have any of the limitations or security models that the client web view is imposed with, right? So you obviously can't do many things because of web security, right? And the controller web view does not care about any of those, right? So the controller web view also has permission to load JNext extensions, which the client web view at the moment does not. Obviously, that is something that we can argue, but the controller web view has the ability to load JNext extensions, right? So if there were like 10 JNext extensions, it is the one that is responsible for loading each one of these JNext extensions. So JNext extension, again, is nothing but your native code, right? And there's the index.js file. So if you look here, you had the client.js file and the index.js file, right? And the client.js file runs in the client web view. The index.js file runs in the controller web view. So these are like the two pieces that talk to each other over XHR, right? So if you want to talk from the client web view to the controller web view, you make an XHR call. So it's a special XHR call to HTTP localhost 8472, and that every localhost 8472 call is caught by the WebWorks SDK. It does not go out, right? So it does not let it go out of the web view, essentially. And the index.js, so if the controller web view wants to talk back to the client web view, obviously if you are executing an API, it's useless to just call the API, right? You have to get something back from it, right? So if you had a sync API, you can just return the XHR call. But if you were doing callbacks, things like that, it basically communicates over execute JavaScript. So this controller web view can execute JavaScript on the client web view, and the entire eventing model is based on that. Okay, so don't worry about the text. It's all small, I know, but it's kind of irrelevant at this point, and it'll become bigger as time goes on. So basically, how the call stack works here is your app, the JavaScript that you wrote, talks to the client.js, right? So when you make a BlackBerry invoke or BlackBerry any app or system or any of the API calls, it routes it to the client.js file of your API. That client.js file makes an XHR call over to the index, which is caught by the index.js file. So if you notice here, it's the localhost 8472, and it's caught by the index.js. The index.js file talks to the wrapper. So just a JNext extension, like an SO file, is not good enough. You must wrap it with a JavaScript file, a very thin JavaScript file. I'll show you all that today, right? So it sounds like a whole lot of things, but it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. A lot of boilerplate stuff. So JNext.js, index.js calls to JNext.js. JNext.js calls down to native, native returns, and you go all the way up the stack, right? So that's basically what this is, but we'll keep coming back to the slide to make sure that no one's lost. Okay, so let's build an API, right? So in the past, I've built, two hello worlds, and feedback I got was, well, that wasn't showing me a whole lot, right? So what we're going to build today is we're going to build an example.test.setWallpaper. So sorry, all over the presentation, you might notice that my naming is not very good, and I apologize, but hopefully it's not hard to follow. But so we got an example.test.setWallpaper that you want to call from your WebWorks app. You want to take in a file path, and so you already know the native API that does this, right? So that's the whole point of writing a WebWorks extension, that you know that the native SDK does something that the WebWorks SDK does not, right? So you decide, okay, so let's write so there's a native API called home screen, and I can set the wallpaper using it. So I want to call it from WebWorks. So these are the two pieces that need to talk to each other, right? So one is a native, on the bottom there is the native code, and top is the WebWorks API that you want to call. So now we go back to build all the pieces that we talked about: the client.js file, the index.js file, the JNext wrapper, the JNext JavaScript wrapper, and the JNext.so, right? So the extension.so. Sorry, one piece I forgot. So the manifest.json. So this is the easiest, probably the simplest part of the extension, but very important. We've not had this in the past, but we've definitely wanted to introduce something this time that made it a whole lot easier to define your namespaces and dependencies and things like that. So global is a flag that you can use to whether you want your extension whitelisted or not, right? So if you just set it to true, it bypasses the whitelisting logic and it'll always be there, right? Namespace, so in this case, obviously we were building example.test.setWallpaper. So it's obviously going, the namespace is obviously example.test. Dependencies is something interesting. We haven't quite used it so far, but if you're interested in using it, it's simplistic in nature. I think it's far more likely that third parties would use it than we would use it. But basically how it works is if you write an extension, so if Rory writes an extension that you don't want to do all the heavy lifting yourself, and somebody here has already written an extension, you can depend on it. And what that means is if I, as an app developer, will come out and use Rory's extension and whitelist it in my config XML, your extension will just get pulled in. So, which is kind of interesting, right? Unfortunately, we haven't had the opportunity to use it, but I'm hoping one of you guys will use it. Right? Okay, so amongst the pieces that we were going to build, first one is the client.js file. Okay, so the responsibility of the client.js file is to expose an API to the client web view. So you saw the two web views, the client web view on one side and the controller web view. So this is the file that exposes this method, right? So what is the method that we want to, so we've already defined the namespace, right? It's example.test. The API that we are trying to expose here is setWallpaper. So we just go, so we define an object, self, whatever, and export it. And we basically create a method called setWallpaper. So what does this do now? Now the responsibility of this is to make an XHR call, right? So if you notice here, going back here, what was it supposed to do, right? We know that if we want to talk from the client web view to the controller web view, we got to make an XHR call. Obviously, every extension is going to do this, and we are not going to be making, write all the XHR code every time. So we have the concept of an exec sync. So window.webworks is something that's available, and you can call exec sync on it. Exec sync will take your namespace. It will take the method that you were calling on the index.js file, right? So basically, from the client, you're trying to call the index.js file. And obviously, this takes in file as a parameter, so you must pass that, right? So all you get is a JSON object, and you pass whatever. You fill it up, and you pass it along, right? Okay. So now everyone understands where we are. It's basically app.js, it's an example.test.setWallpaper, XHR call over, localhost 8472, name of the namespace in between, setWallpaper, args equals file this, right? File path, right? So you basically made it over to the index.js file. So at this point, the WebWorks SDK caught that and routed to the index.js. So now we're in the index.js file. So here you get a standard interface when you get the setWallpaper call. You must have a success function, you must have a fail, args, and environment. I don't know what we were thinking when we put the environment there, because everyone seems to just pass everything in args. But I imagine that we will use environment at some point when we have different types of extensions. At this point, all extensions look exactly the same, so there's not a whole lot of purpose to it. But basically, what do you do here? So when something comes over XHR, it's obviously encoded, right? So you must decode your URI component. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a decoded JSON object. So I got args, and I make that equal to, I basically decode the file that lived in it, right? The file argument that was in it. From there, I must call the JNEXT wrapper, right? So if you look at the top line there, it's a little out of context at this point, but it'll make sense over the next couple of slides. Basically, what we do is we create a new JNEXT.qtest, right? So this is just a new JNEXT object that we are instantiating. So we will learn how to do that. So it makes sense. I instantiated the JNEXT wrapper, right? Created an object, and I call qtest.setWallpaper on it and pass the decoded JSON object to it, right? Is everyone with me? Yeah? Hearing some nods. Excellent. So everything makes sense? This is where we are in the stack, right? Qtest set wallpaper, you got file path, and still not at native. Almost there. Okay, so this is a simplified JNEXT wrapper. So once we're in code, I'll show you the exact JNEXT wrapper. But here's the simple one. So what it does is, it's got a few responsibilities. It must load the JNEXT library. So the library, like the JNEXT library that I created on the native side is called libqtest4, because it took me 4 tries to change the name of it. But anyways, finally made it there. So basically, libqtest4.so lives in is my extension, my native extension, right? So require loads it. So again, this should be familiar to most web developers. It is simply like any other require framework. You're just requiring something that's on the native side. And what it basically allows you to do is it allows you to lazy load JNEXT plugins, right? Which is actually very awesome. So where we use something like this is, for example, BBM, right? So a huge part of the BBM API, it lives on the native side, right? But there are some parts that go over the invocation framework. So I don't want that if Rory here is using the invocation part of BBM, the SO gets pulled in, right? That's completely waste of memory. I definitely don't want that, right? So on his first call to the native API, that's when I load the JNEXT, right? So he might notice that the first call has lesser performance than the others, right? But it allows us to be more memory efficient in a WebWorks app. And some people might remember other versions of WebWorks. Basically, that is the most crucial part of this, right? In the manifest.json over the next little while, we might introduce the concept of lazy loading JNEXT extensions and move some of this code over to the manifest, right? Where you don't have to actually do it, it just happens by magic. But right now, if you go on to write one, you'll definitely have to do this. So the second part is you create the object. So this is the qtest object is what you're creating on the native side, right? So think of it, switch gears, right? So we're getting into native flow now, right? So you got new qtest extends JNEXT, and so we'll talk about all of that in the next slide. But basically so it has 3 responsibilities in this case. You got require, create object, and now you go on to set the wallpaper. To set the wallpaper, right? So if you remember, we called this JNEXT.qtest equals function. This is the one that we instantiated here, right? In the first line. So you're here, you call set wallpaper. JNEXT, you get pure string. You cannot pass args to it, right? So you get invoke. So when you created the object, you got an ID back. You take that ID and you call every method on the native side with that ID. You then call set wallpaper and pass the args to it, right? So in this case, I've just put in a little space between the set wallpaper and the args so that I can parse it on the native side, right? So the space is kind of hard to see on that screen, I think. But you notice a very, very small space here. Well, that's a real space, though. So basically, now we're finally at the native side, right? Like we're almost there. We just called our object. So we're going to step into that code soon. But basically, you called set wallpaper with set wallpaper, space, file, and a JSON object, stringified, right? So now you must parse this on the native side. Thankfully, all our APIs do it, and you can just copy paste the code, and there's not a whole lot of work in it. So the JNEXT Native side. So what are all the methods that you need to implement here? The there are about 5 total methods, but a couple of them just return completely boilerplate stuff. You don't even need to modify it from extension to extension. These 2, you kind of need to do something, but it basically, QTest is an extension that you, QTest is the class that extends JSNext, which is just the JNEXT plugin file, right? So it's again, boilerplate, not a whole lot to know there. You can just take any of our extensions and do the exact same thing. So onCreateObject gets called when you call createObject from the JavaScript wrapper. So if you remember, if you go back, right here, you called createObject in that 4th line. So basically, that's when you call that, this gets called. So one JNEXT extension could potentially create 10 different objects, right? So at that point, you will have to obviously if-else this, but right now, I can just return this because I'm always creating the same one. This is where you do your work. So when the invoke method gets called from the JNEXT wrapper, you're here in the invoke method. So at the top there, in gray, I show what the command is when it gets passed in here, right? So you get set wallpaper, space, file, path. Again, space is very small, but it is definitely a space. So what I do here is just to simplify things. Obviously, you can use whatever kind of parsing you want, but all I do is I find the first space, left part becomes my method, right part becomes my the args, and I call set wallpaper, right? So moving from there, I get to where I have to actually put my native code to do this. So I parse the JNEXT object. Again, boilerplate, don't have to do a whole lot. Just change the string, and then call the native code that actually sets the home screen. So, and return success, right? So to be honest, I'm pretty sure set wallpaper should return something. It should return that. I kind of just realized that. But anyway, so when you come in here, the JSON object, like the argument that is getting passed to this method is basically just file path, right? And as soon as you stringify, you parse, and you convert that to a QString, and you call a Qt method, right? So this, you know what? This is not that hard. This is not a whole lot of work, right? Like it might feel like a whole lot of pieces, but they kind of just come together pretty easily. Okay, so imagine that you have already compiled your native code, but basically you create a shared library project in the NDK. So you download the NDK, obviously, right? You create a shared library project and extend JSNext. There's some boilerplate templates there. You just pull those in. Again, simple stuff. You build it, right? You build it for ARM, and you build it for x86, right? So one is for the simulator, one is for the device, right? So then you create. So hopefully, most of you have seen a WebWorks SDK before, and you have, so by default, it'll go into developer, SDKs, research in motion, BlackBerry 10 WebWorks, some version, right? Inside there, you'll see a framework folder. Inside the framework folder, there's an ext folder. That's where all the extensions live. And it'll look something like this on the latest SDK. Jam35 is obviously the extension that we just created. And you throw in the manifest.json, the client.js file, the index.js file, and the JNEXT wrapper, I've just included into the index.js file. There's no need for a separate file for it, right? And you have both your SO files that you compiled for native code, right? Throw all of this together, go on, compile your app, and you start using it, right? So now, hopefully the stack completely makes sense, but I'm going to leave this slide up while I'm going to actually debug some code, right? And we're going to walk through this stack again, and hopefully it's more clear and makes sense, right? So unfortunately, it's kind of too much pressure to create this on the fly in a session. But even that I've tried before. It doesn't work a whole lot better. Can you switch to my, this guy, the phone? Yeah. Okay. So here's a simple app. It will take a picture. It will just attempt to kind of display a picture. And it will set it to wallpaper, right? This is what we wanted, right, when we got started. So the reason why I'm showing this is because set wallpaper is not an API that is available through WebWorks today, right? Well, hopefully for launch it will be, but it definitely is not today. So, all right, take a picture. Like Rory. All right, smile. All right. There we go. So you can see him kind of smiling and blushing a little bit, but all right, and I set it to wallpaper, right? So I am paused in debugger. All right, can you switch to my Mac? Okay, I'm going to take a seat here. So has everyone used the web inspector with BlackBerry? Yeah. Yeah, it's a whole lot more useful when you're completely in JavaScript, and very little time is spent in native code. So basically here. So remember I said you'll see 3 web views? These are the 3 web views, right? So the overlay web view is your where all the UI, the dialogues, the context menus. So if you see a context menu bug and you want to debug it, just go in here. All the code is there. Right? And capture photo is your app, right? So that's the client web view, right? So if you remember, we talked about client web view, controller web view. So the top one is the controller web view. That's the all-powerful God web view. The second one is your web view, where your app runs, your code runs, and the client JS file runs, right? So ignore the last one. We don't care, right? Not for this presentation. So again, top one is the controller one. That's where your JNEXT file, JNEXT SO gets loaded. That's where the JNEXT wrappers are. That's where the index.js file lives, right? The capture photo web view, the second one, is where the client.js file lives, because that is the code that gets injected into your web view, right? So we will look at, so obviously we are stopped in debugger. So yeah, do not judge my code. Written late hours last night. Okay, so what is this? This is the app that you just saw, right? All it does is takes a picture. So invoke card, invoke camera, boom, off you go. Give me the file back. It gives you a file back. You display the image in an image tag. You're done with that part. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot, but basically, you're in the set wallpaper, right? So when I click the set wallpaper button, this is what happens. It went in here. The path I got back from the camera, right? So when I tried to invoke when I took a picture, I got a path back for it, right? So now I got a path, I got example test set wallpaper. So when I step in here, can anyone tell me where I'm going to go? Excellent. See, I'm making a difference. All right. Okay, so this is the client.js file. Kind of remember this from the presentation? It's basically the same. Calls that exec sync function. That's going to make that exachar call, right? So now I'm here and here. All right. So now if I step into this, right? So what all do I have here? I'm creating a file, right? So this is the 24th time I've tried this since morning. You can see it's image number 24, but it's basically file, and obviously if user doesn't pass anything, I don't pass anything. But basically now the ID is equal to example.test. That is the ID that we put in the manifest.json, right? So you got manifest.json's ID here of your extension. You got setWallpaper is the method you're trying to call on the index.js file. File are the arguments you're passing in, right? You step into here. That's it. You're in the exec function. What do you do here? So you look here. All it does is there's a whole lot of stuff to eventually just make an XHR call, right? So obviously, this is something that we can see in the Networks tab. So you remember when I called the invoke camera? That also went over localhost 8472, so you can see that one here too. Image, when I grabbed that back, I still got, like when I put it to the image source, I saw it here. setWallpaper is the post I just made, right? So headers. Can everyone see this? This is too small. Still okay? All right. So what is the payload here? So remember I said that this string will get encoded because it has to go over URI. Here's your encoded string, right? So you got file and encoded path, right? All going over to localhost 8472 example.test, which is your namespace, setWallpaper. No response so far because we're stopped on the other side now, right? So it's kind of cool, right? So I move on to the next side, right? It's another web view, so I can debug that in the web inspector too. So this is the index.js file. So does it look familiar? At least should, kind of, looks familiar. So basically here, all I'm doing is setting the, so here's the debugger, here are the args, right? So I'm creating that second JSON object that I'm going to pass down to native, right? Because I don't want to have to do the decoding of URI components in native because, well, that's going to take a lot of effort. Well, at least a little more effort than it takes on the browser, right? So I can just call decode URI component here, and it's easier here, right? Theoretically, you can pass the args directly and then decode it on the native side. It's really up to you where you're more comfortable, right? Probably not any more or less efficient either way. So remember the JNEXT wrapper? That's what this looks like, right? So the one that we saw was very simplified, right? So this one's a little more real world. So in the init function, which gets called at initialization, you basically require the JNEXT library. If this fails, you want to make sure you tell the user or you inform the developer that, you know what, your SO didn't load. So some of you might have tried to use RIPL with BB10, and you will get a pretty nasty message dialog alert saying pps.so cannot be loaded. And so that's basically where it's coming from, right? Basically what happens is there was a bug on RIPL in the last increment that when you tried to deploy it to the device, it used the simulator bar, right? So so that's why you saw this, because it was compiled for x86 and wouldn't load on the device, right? Anyways, that is fixed now. So let's step in. So now my args are equal to file decoded, right? Make sense? Here, bugger, and the invoke method. So when we created this JNEXT object down here, we stored a MID, right? Basically an ID for this object. That's the ID we want to pass in here so that we know, so that JNEXT knows what SO to call, right? setWallpaper is our method. So yeah, I wasn't lying about the space, the real space here. And JSON stringify, right? So if I grab all of this and here, that's what it looks like. So that's what's going to go to native, right? So we'll have to do all the parsing. If you guys remember, there wasn't a whole lot, but I'm going to step in here into my NDK. So this is the tool that comes with the NDK. This is, don't worry about all those. There's a whole lot going on. So this is the file you're most interested in. I do not know if I can zoom this. Oh, look at that. This is not any better. Can you guys read that? It's too low? No? Kind of? Okay. All right, so I said you'll have to do a little more than I showed there. So what all am I doing here in my native code? So I'm obviously pulling in the home screen include, right? I'm pulling in plugin.h, which is the JNEXT file that you're trying to extend, essentially, right? So that's the JNEXT class that you're trying to extend. So right here, that's the JNEXT class. That's the invoke method we saw, right? So it's exactly the same. Notify event is used for async event callbacks. I didn't want to go into that too much because that'll take a whole lot of other time, and I'll have to explain all the eventing frameworks on the. But you can. It should be every extension, every WebWorks extension today does it. So you can just look at it. Look at any one of them that use native code, right? So. Okay, so here's the set wallpaper, right? So this is all the stuff that we did that I showed you up there. Here are the get object on create, right? That is all I've done here. That is the physical code that I wrote to make this happen. All of this that you see here is just my JSON parser. So I grabbed this off of the WebWorks SDK. I did not do, like, if you just go into the WebWorks SDK dependencies folder, obviously you'll have to go to the GitHub repo, but all of this code is right there. You can just grab that. Plugin.cpp, plugin.h, tokenizer.cpp, these are all JNEXT stuff. Did not write a single line of code there. All I've done is put it all into public, and I moved on, right? So that's it. You get it. It is not difficult. It's just poorly documented. So right here, what I have to do is once I've written this code, I build, right? I build, so see here, it produced an ARM library because that's what this was configured for. So if you want, you can go into properties, C++ build, somewhere here it will let you. So you can change it to the simulator, right? And it'll build for the simulator. You can probably do multiple as well, although multiple configurations. You can select them. And that's it. That's all you got to do. Once you build this, you throw the .so file into an extension folder, like I said, and that's it. So I'm going to quickly open 35. Qtest. That's the native code. You should probably set wallpaper. Oh, sorry, wrong folder. Too many attempts. Final extension. So right here, if you see, all I have is the client.js file. So this is the jam35 that I showed extension, and that's it, right? And I got a simulator SO, a device SO, and a simulator SO, right? So I just grab it from there and put it here. So one of the things that we're going to build for BB10 soon enough is some kind of a command line tool that will generate all these files, right? And tie it to the build systems. And so the WebWorks team, which is not a whole lot of people, but we normally don't use the QD tool. Most of us are VI and command line guys, so we just use CMake, right? So if you want to go down that path, that is, in fact, in some ways easier, right? Because all our extensions actually use it. So I was just going to open GitHub here. Actually, you know what? Before we leave, I should really return this XHR. So sources, we were here. Oh no. Oh no, it's not good. Where am I? Right. I think, yeah, oh, sorry. Leaving that page seems to have pressed play. But basically, if you look here, now my extension is back. Like green light and the status response. Remember we returned success from it? That's it, right here. Again, encoded, right? And you'll have to decode it yourself, but basically you're back. So if we had to decode this, we could just go decode URI component and pass in this guy, and we'll get this, right? So code 1 is just error stuff we're returning for the WebWorks.js to understand this better, and data is the success you got back, right? That's it, right? So it's not very complicated. I don't quite completely understand why we got on the forums so hammered for putting that first extension out there, saying that, oh, this is too difficult, I can't understand this. But I think it's just a matter of time as more extensions become available, and all these tools that I mentioned that we're going to generate these files and all this, they become available, things will get easier and better, right? And the good thing is we're all open source, right? So if you look at framework, so we have two repos. We have the packager and the framework. So both are under BlackBerry. One is called BB10 WebWorks Framework. One is called BB10 WebWorks Packager. And that's it. Those are your two repos where all the magic happens, right? And if you create an awesome extension and you want to contribute it to WebWorks SDK, fork this repo and make a pull request. I promise you we will help you get it in, right? So we're trying every day to grow this community of people, contributors. We're actually starting to get some external contributors, and it's as the phone comes out and reaches launch date, more and more of this will become possible, right? So one thing that I wanted to show here was that not all of these extensions, so these are all the extensions that just got delivered, right? So not all of these extensions go down to native, but a lot do, right? So you see here, you got a native folder. So any of the extensions that are going to do native code will have this. There's a lot of magic that I have not explained here, so you might see things like this, no native code. And you're like, what the, like, how did this happen, right? And we're basically down here to index.js, and you see a lot of this web platform type of stuff, like qnix.webplatform. That just basically means that we push the native code down to WebKit, right? And we can just do it there, so we expose it that way to ourselves. And soon enough, we plan to expose this qnix.webplatform as well, right? And you'll see a lot of that magic also get exposed to you guys, and you guys can use it as well. Even today, it is pseudo available. If you are interested in building in the open source and really living on the cutting edge of this, it is also possible. It might take a little more work from the outside, but it is definitely possible. And I personally get on the phone with you and make you do it if that's what it takes, right? But some of the extensions that do native stuff today are push, pim contacts, connection, and BBM. So basically, if you look at connection, it does BPS stuff. So the native strategy is also a little split. Like there is something called BPS, which is pure C, and there is Qt C++, right? So depending on which world you like to live in, you can either go directly to BPS and use code that'll probably look like something like this, right? So you'll have some kind of a event loop somewhere, and you'll have to throw in, grab the, it's more low level than Qt code that something like PIM uses. So step in here. Well, needless to say why it took us so long to do this extension. Contacts, Qt. So Qt code will look something like this, something like what I showed, right? This is higher level, easier to understand, easier to write for some people. Some people prefer to live absolutely in C land, and that's perfectly acceptable too. JNEXT doesn't really care. Obviously, it is more efficient to stay in C than in Qt, but that's just theoretical because some of our extensions are using Qt as well. So it's not, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. So that's pretty much what I have for you guys. How am I doing for time? How much time do we have? Okay, well, smack. On time. All right. That was my plan all along. Okay, so do I have any questions? Like, anything that I didn't explain well that you guys want to know more about? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Right. Do you mind stepping up to the mic, actually?
So I've built extensions for WebWorks the last couple of years. You changed, in October 11th, you changed the way you're doing it because of memory problems. You went to a new way that actually never got published, and it was to do with XHR and long polling. And
yep.
Has this eliminated the long polling issue with doing XHR on event callbacks?
You will not have any problems. It is my personal guarantee.
It's being recorded, eh? So, okay, that's good. Namespacing, if we're writing our own and want to contribute them back, namespace them by your company and type of thing, or, because remember we had to do BlackBerry dot.
You don't have to do BlackBerry dot.
Okay.
It is an open source repo, which has nothing to do with BlackBerry, apart from the fact that most contributors today are BlackBerry.
Yeah, so if we have to throw them all into that extension folder, then
you can do whatever you want.
Calm down, whatever.
You can call it whatever the hell you want.
And
just don't trample on one of our namespaces.
Yeah, and you said lazy loading to save memory and stuff. Do you have a way of we can unload something once we?
You can unrequire things. So you mean unload a JNEXT library?
Yeah.
That's a very good point. We should build something for it. I don't think JNEXT does that today. I don't think JNEXT will allow it. Require, on the other hand, so if require, like if you require a module, you can unrequire it essentially. I don't think JNEXT allows that today, but that is actually very good feedback. I would like to see that happen for us.
Just a lot of memories with the old WebWorks.
Yeah, like so there is something called a low memory event that comes to you straight from the device. Yeah. So if you notice that many times you will talk to the web guys about, even last night at the roundtable, like, oh, we aggressively give up memory and we aggressively use memory. The real way to do it is, you use whatever memory you want and need responsibly, and then you, when the low memory event comes in, you give it all up, right? And you're absolutely correct. There should be a way to, unrequire the JNEXT part. Because most apps would probably use it only for one API and then they want to get rid of it, right? Yeah. Okay, we will build something.
And some of the other ones you'll be at?
I will be at all the roundtables, but yes. Okay, and I do not kid about this. Unrequire for JNEXT. Unload JNEXT extensions after use to help memory management. There you go. Your issue. Do you have a GitHub ID? So, but yeah, I actually really encourage you guys to come have a look at our repos. And actually, the final slide that I didn't show in my presentation actually has the names of both repos, and you can go there. And you have a problem, like you're building an extension and you're having trouble with it. Contact and you think that there's an actual bug, even if you don't think it's an actual bug, but you think something's not done best way or can be done better, feel free to contribute it back or come ask questions, open an issue. Worst comes to worst, it'll get closed, right? It's nothing wrong with that. I would really like to see us do things differently this time, though. When you build an extension, bring it to the platform. Bring it to the platform because we want to know what you are trying to do. What you can do from the outside, we can do it significantly better sometimes from the inside, right? It goes through many cycles of testing. A lot more people see it and use it. So there are contributor agreements with BlackBerry. Sign a BlackBerry contributor agreement and throw in your extension into it. And if it's not properly formatted, doesn't meet our standards, but we really like what you've done, we will help you if you're interested in actually improving it. If you want to just kind of go, no, it works for me, you guys do the work. I don't want to do more, right? So then we'll take it. We'll take it and we'll do the work. That's not a problem, right? And like to believe we're a responsible open source project, right? And we will truly, in just another release, I think we will truly be building in the open source, doing more and more in the open source every day, right? So, anything else?
Hi, maybe a stupid question. I have to warn you, I have zero knowledge about WebWorks, but just to understand the concept. So you showed us how to build extension to use native functions, right? How this is packaged from application perspective. If you build a WebWorks application which is using that particular extension, I assume there is some shared library at the end of the day where we go through all the wrappers, right? Then we are going to native code. Is this library packaged with every single application,
Yes.
or there is
It's packaged with every single application.
Okay, so there is nothing like that framework. It centrally exists in some.
So there are JNEXT libraries that we load from device that you don't see here. Some of the libraries that we are doing today, I'm slowly thinking about moving some of them off the packager, like off the package bar into the device itself. Depends on what you're doing. If you build an extension that we really like, I will take it in and we'll put it on device.
Okay.
Right? So if there is truly an advantage to it being in the bar, we'll leave it in the bar. It's all shared memory, so it doesn't really matter, right? Like it's not, in fact, there's a lot of initiative on the native side to move a lot of things into the bar, right? And I truly don't completely understand all the motivations behind it because I concentrate on the web side of things, but there's a lot of reasons to have it both ways, essentially, right? The packager remains the same if you're, like, all it is a command line BBWP command. Hit it up and you just throw your extension in there and it gets bundled in. If you build for the simulator part goes in. If you build for the device part goes in. So, anything else? Anyone? There are no stupid questions. All right. Well, hopefully this was helpful, right? And please don't tell me that WebWorks can't do this because it can. It just needs a little more work, right? Okay. All right. That's it. Thanks, guys.